The Silent Return of the Black Cat, a tale of grief, beauty, and unspoken truth in the Tang Dynasty, where a mystical feline unveils the betrayal behind a beloved consort's death, defying history's lies to restore her honor through forgotten magic, eternal love, and the power of memory that endures. The capital of the Tang Dynasty, Chang'an, pulsed with life, its streets alive with poetry, music, and the rich aroma of roasted meats and sweet wines. Lanterns floated above canals, and scholars, poets, and nobles mingled in grand halls. The empire stood at its pinnacle, shining with culture and power. Yet beneath its opulent surface, threads of decay had already begun to unravel. In a city that celebrated beauty and illusion, truth had long since been buried, and its emergence would come not by human hands, but through something far more ancient and mysterious. It began when the imperial astronomer, a man devoted to the stars and omens, died in madness and fear. His final moments were filled with horror, as if he had glimpsed something that defied all reason. The palace was disturbed by whispers of his demise. His chambers were found torn apart, his eyes open in frozen terror. There was no sign of a human intruder, but claw marks scratched deep into the walls hinted at something else. Shortly after, a black cat appeared within the palace grounds. Unlike any ordinary feline, this creature moved with eerie purpose. Its emerald eyes gleamed with knowing, and its steps echoed in empty corridors as though followed by the past. While the court reeled from the death of the astronomer, a renowned poet named Bai Latian arrived at the palace. Bai, a man of sharp wit and graceful expression, was celebrated across the empire for his literary talent. He had witnessed the twilight of the Tang court's grandeur and felt its weight in every stanza he composed. Drawn by the unnatural circumstances and a long-nurtured suspicion about events of the past, he was determined to learn the truth behind the tragedy now unfolding. Almost at the same time, a Japanese monk named Kukai, visiting Chang'an to study Buddhist texts, found himself intrigued by the rumors. A student of esoteric teachings and the supernatural, Kukai recognized the signs of a restless spirit. The two men, strangers by origin but kindred in purpose, formed an unlikely alliance. They were soon joined in their investigation by frightened whispers from within the palace servants claiming the cat spoke in human language, predicting death, while others reported visions and nightmares following its appearance. As fear grew, more victims followed. A high-ranking official perished in similarly disturbing fashion, his body found lifeless and curled in torment. The evidence began to weave a pattern. Each victim had some connection to the palace's inner circle during the reign of the late Emperor Xuanzong, and more specifically to the legendary Lady Yang Yuhuan. Lady Yang had once stood as the empire's jewel, an unmatched beauty and favored consort of the emperor. Her radiance was said to halt conversation, her laughter to calm storms. But her fate had ended in tragedy. During a military rebellion years earlier, Lady Yang was forced to take her own life to appease mutinous soldiers who blamed her for the empire's misfortunes. At Mawei Station, far from the golden halls of Chang'an, she was reported to have been hanged by imperial decree. Her death left the emperor shattered, and the memory of her grace became legend, immortalized in poems and paintings. But not everyone believed the official story. Bai, whose poetry had once extolled Lady Yang's virtues, harbored a quiet conviction that something had been hidden. Kukai, drawn by his spiritual insights and experience with ritual magic, sensed the unrest of a soul denied justice. Their search led them into the underbelly of the imperial court, where beneath golden ceilings lay shadows thick with guilt. They began seeking out survivors from Lady Yang's era, servants, musicians, and officials now old and scattered. One such person was Chungqin, the palace steward who had once served during those fateful years. Chungqin lived in seclusion, his mind fractured by time and guilt. His residence was surrounded by cats, eerily calm and observant, as if guarding something more than memory. With reluctance, he guided them through the recollection of Lady Yang's final days. He recounted how, in the days leading up to her death, strange events had begun to occur. Phantom sounds, flickering lights, and mysterious visions. But the most chilling memory was of a cat as black as midnight, following her wherever she went, silent yet present, as though protecting her or watching. Further investigation brought them to an abandoned villa on the outskirts of the city, once belonging to a foreign magician named Huai. This enigmatic man, once a court entertainer and close confidant of Lady Yang, was said to possess knowledge of illusions and unseen forces. His performances had dazzled the court, but few knew of the bond he had formed with Lady Yang behind the scenes. It was whispered he had once loved her, not with courtly ambition, but with sincerity born of quiet admiration. After her death, he vanished without a trace except for one thing, his beloved pet, a black cat gifted to him by Lady Yang herself. In the dust-choked villa, they discovered signs of long-forgotten magic runes etched into walls, spellbooks filled with incantations of resurrection and remembrance, and the cat's ancient bedding, preserved like a shrine. Kukai deduced that this cat, now haunting the palace, was no longer of the ordinary world. It had transcended the natural order, sustained by grief, devotion, and the forces Huai had once commanded. It had returned to right a wrong buried by time. The more they learned, the more the palace resisted. Officials began obstructing their investigation. Records disappeared overnight, witnesses were silenced, and anonymous threats followed them. But their resolve did not waver. From ancient scrolls, Kukai traced the rituals. Huai had used spells that could tether a soul to the mortal plane, not to harm, but to serve as a vessel of justice. He realized the cat was not a harbinger of doom, but a spirit-bound creature seeking to awaken memories that history had tried to erase. One evening, in a hidden chamber beneath the old Imperial Library, they uncovered a painted screen that had once adorned Lady Yang's private quarters. It depicted her surrounded by her attendants, her eyes filled with life. Yet upon close examination, Bai noticed a strange addition, a shadowy cat hidden near her feet, absent in earlier versions of the same portrait. It had been painted posthumously, perhaps by Huai, suggesting that the cat had become the vessel of her unspoken pain. The brushwork was tender, mournful, and suffused with longing. It was a farewell, not from a lover, but from someone who could not bear the injustice of her fate. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place when they located a tomb thought to have been Lady Yang's true burial site. Contrary to the official record, which claimed she died at Maui and was buried in haste, this tomb was a private construction hidden beneath a ruined temple, a place once sacred to the magician Huai. Inside, they found her belongings, clothes untouched by time, ornaments bearing the royal crest, and personal items that told a story no scroll ever had. The tomb was not marked by grandeur, but by love. Its walls bore writings etched in quiet despair, confessions of those who had failed her, and a poem written in the same style as Huai's known works. It was then that they understood. Lady Yang had not died as recorded. She had been poisoned slowly, not on the emperor's command, but orchestrated by powerful figures at court who viewed her influence as dangerous. She had sensed her doom, but had remained silent, choosing dignity over protest. In her final days, Huai had tried to save her through mystical means, but his efforts were too late. When she died, his grief twisted his art into something darker. Through forbidden magic, he preserved her essence not in a ghost, but in the cat they had once shared. The cat had lived for decades, wandering in the shadows, waiting for the time when truth could be spoken again. With this revelation, Bai Latian's understanding of history shattered. The woman he had once praised in verse had suffered not as a tragic beauty of fate, but as a victim of palace treachery. Kukai, though foreign to the empire, felt the sorrow etched into its foundations. They knew now that the cat, bound by memory and purpose, had no desire for vengeance. It only sought for the truth to surface, for Lady Yang's name to be cleansed of lies, and for her soul to find peace. As they left the tomb, the cat stood at the threshold, eyes solemn, fur shimmering under the moonlight. It did not pounce or flee. It simply watched as though recognizing that the time had come. The silence was heavy, not with fear, but with the weight of memory. And so the first half of the story came to its turning point, not with blood, but with revelation. The legend of the demon cat was no tale of horror, but one of deep sorrow. Justice had not been served by courts or decrees, but by an animal born of magic and mourning, returning across time to speak where others would not. Yet more still lay buried, and before peace could be found, the final veil of illusion would need to be torn away. As the shadows lengthened over Chang'an, the veil that had obscured the past began to lift. The city remained vibrant on the surface, lutes strumming in tea-houses, courtiers laughing in pavilions, but a deeper undercurrent stirred, awakened by the uncovering of truth. Bai Ladian and Kukai returned from the secret tomb forever changed. They had seen the evidence hidden for decades, spoken with the broken remnants of an imperial era, and understood at last that the tale of Lady Yang Yuan had never ended. It had only been muffled. Their work, however, was not yet done. Truth was fragile in an empire governed by image and power. To preserve it would mean challenging not only the official history, but also the very foundation of the current court. The demon cat, bound by the pain of its late master, lingered still, its purpose incomplete. It moved through the palace like a shadow given life, its green eyes glinting with ancient sorrow. Wherever it passed, silence followed. Some trembled at its presence. Others fell into trances, reliving memories long buried. The boundary between past and present grew thin. Bai began to write again, though his verses no longer celebrated the empire's grandeur. Now they lamented lost beauty, forgotten voices, and the cruelty of fate. Kukai, driven by duty and compassion, immersed himself in esoteric texts and spiritual rites, seeking a way to help the cat's soul pass on. But the palace grew restless. Whispers of their discoveries had spread among servants and ministers. Some feared scandal, others feared the cat itself. Orders were issued quietly. The foreigners were to be watched, their movement restricted. The web of secrecy tightened once more. Unwilling to be silenced, Bai and Kukai sought the emperor. Though aged and burdened by decades of rule, the sovereign still remembered Lady Yang. Her name lingered in his thoughts like perfume that never faded. But what they had to reveal could unmake the fragile illusion of closure he had built for himself. He refused to hear them. In his denial, he clung to the past he had been told, not the one that truly was. With no other recourse, they turned to the people. In a midnight ritual within an abandoned temple once used by Huai, Kukai invoked ancient rites passed down from his homeland. With incense and sacred symbols, he created a circle meant to free spirits bound by sorrow. The demon cat arrived silently, its fur shimmering as if dusted with stars. It stepped into the circle without resistance. There, the final memories awakened not in words, but in visions that poured into the minds of all present. They saw Lady Yang not as the courtiers remembered her, but as she had truly been, tender, burdened, and afraid. They saw her poisoned slowly by those who resented her, isolated by whisper campaigns, and finally deceived into believing her death would save the empire. In her final moments, she had written a message, concealed in a locket she gifted to Huai. This locket, once believed lost, had been buried with Huai's belongings. Kukai, guided by the ritual, found it nestled among dried herbs and aged parchment. The locket held not just her final words, but a single strand of her hair and a miniature painting of herself, smiling sadly. These relics, charged with emotion and memory, had bound the cat's spirit to the mortal world. Kukai realized that in preserving these objects, Huai had anchored Lady Yang's sorrow into his magic. He had loved her so deeply that even death could not persuade him to let her go. The ritual intensified. Outside the temple, the air thickened, clouds covered the moon. The cat arched its back and released a long, mournful cry, one that echoed not as a sound but as a wave of emotion, loss, yearning, and a desire for release. Within the circle, the vision continued. The court's betrayal became undeniable. The palace's golden veneer cracked, revealing a pit of envy and fear that had consumed the purest light of the empire. At dawn, the ritual concluded. The cat lay motionless at the center of the circle, its body no longer tense, its eyes closed not in death, but in peace. When the sun rose, its form began to dissolve into mist, as though never meant to remain in the physical world. The temple remained silent, filled only with the scent of lingering incense and the hush of ancient grief finally spoken. But closure brought consequences. The emperor, hearing of the ritual's success and the emergence of truth, reacted not with gratitude but with fury. He ordered Bai's latest writings seized. Kukai was ordered to leave Chang'an immediately. The palace could not allow the official story to be contradicted, not when the empire's stability depended on the sanctity of its myths. The people must remember Lady Yang as a tragic sacrifice, not as a victim of betrayal. Kukai, bound by duty but saddened by the court's reaction, prepared to return to Japan. Before his departure, he met Bai one final time, giving him a sacred scroll that told the story in allegory, one that could survive imperial censors while preserving the truth for those wise enough to read between the lines. Bai, now a man changed by all he had witnessed, refused to let Lady Yang's story fade again. Though the palace burned his public works, he continued to write in secret, composing poems that masked memory within metaphor, hiding truth within beauty. Meanwhile, Kukai carried with him the remnants of the ritual, the locket, and his notes on the cat's binding. Upon returning to his homeland, he wrote a scroll recounting the events under the guise of myth. His tale became known as a legend, one told across generations of a city of gold, a consort of unmatched grace, and a demon cat born not of hell, but of mourning. Time passed. The Tang Dynasty began its decline, weakened by internal strife and fading vision. The palace that once held Lady Yang's laughter turned cold. The corridors that once echoed with music now stood silent. Yet the story endured not in edicts or history books, but in art, in whispered ballads, and in the hearts of poets. Pain, when expressed with honesty, becomes memory, and memory, when passed on, becomes legend. In the far reaches of Chang'an, in a secluded garden once frequented by Lady Yang, a stray cat was seen lounging in the sun. Its eyes were familiar, its movements graceful. Though it was ordinary in appearance, those who visited the garden often left with a strange feeling of warmth and sadness, as if the air remembered a love too great to be forgotten. Bai Litian spent his remaining years composing verse not for emperors, but for the forgotten. He walked among commoners, spoke with wandering monks, and painted images that bore the sorrow of lost elegance. His poems, once banned, found life among traveling storytellers and artists. They recited them in marketplaces and festivals, often accompanied by shadow puppetry, retelling the tale of a woman silenced by power and the magical cat who returned to give her voice. Kukai, honored in his homeland for his spiritual insight, founded temples and translated sacred texts. But on quiet nights, he would gaze into the fire and remember the green-eyed creature who had bridged the worlds of the living and the dead. He never saw the cat again, but sometimes in dreams, he walked the corridors of the imperial palace and heard distant footsteps, soft and feline, trailing behind him. Years turned to decades. New dynasties rose and fell. The official records of Lady Yang Yuan remained unchanged, unchallenged by scholars fearful of imperial wrath. But stories have a way of surviving even when their facts are erased. The legend of the demon cat lived on as a ghost story, a mystery, a poem, and a love story. And in that strange way that history often forgets what is inconvenient and clings to what is beautiful, the tale grew larger than the truth it sprang from. Yet for those who looked closely, for those who read Bailedian's hidden verses or studied Kukai's symbolic scrolls, the truth lay preserved like a delicate fragrance in an old silk fan. There, between the lines, Lady Yang breathed again, not as a royal consort, but as a woman who had been deeply loved, cruelly betrayed, and quietly avenged by the most unlikely of spirits. Her cat had walked through the veil of death, through magic, court intrigue, and time itself, not with vengeance, but with sorrow. It sought no justice through violence, no satisfaction through blood. It only wanted her truth to be known, for her beauty to be remembered not as a tool of power, but as a soul whose light had been unfairly extinguished. And so when night falls on the ruins of old Chang'an, and the moon casts silver shadows on broken stone, some say they still see a black cat perched atop a wall, watching the stars as though waiting. Not haunting, not hunting, but remembering.